All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Applicant Information webinar for the 9th call of Recordings at Risk. We are really glad that you could join us today. During this session, we'll give a brief overview of eligibility for this grant program, show you how to start an application, provide an overview of what's asked, and share a few final tips. We'll then turn to questions. So I'm Becca Kwan, and I'm joined today by my fellow program officer, Sharon Burney, along with our colleagues, Allison Pope, Lizzie Albert, and Diane Ramirez. We'd like to begin with a few brief introductions to this platform, to CLEAR as an organization, and to our team. So first, to the platform. Though many of us are old pros at Zoom by now, we wanted to provide just a few reminders. There is a live transcript being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, you'll click the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you're welcome to use chat for general introductions and conversation. And I was having so much fun reading through where everyone's located, so please continue to share. If a chat box isn't already displaying on your Zoom screen, you can hover your mouse towards the bottom of the screen and open it manually. In order to send a message to everyone, remember to change the default from panelists to everyone. We ask that you use the separate Q&A box to ask questions today. This can be opened the same way as the chat box, and you can submit questions at any point during the webinar. We'll have dedicated time to answer all of them at the end. And because we have limited time together, please feel free to follow along with the questions as they come in and upvote them to let us know that it would be helpful to have them answered live. And finally, the session recording and transcript will be made available on the Applicant Resources page of our website following the event. So now we'll talk a little bit more about CLEAR. We always like to start with CLEAR's mission. We're an independent nonprofit organization that forges strategies to enhance research, teaching, and learning environments in collaboration with libraries, cultural institutions, and communities of higher learning. Our work is varied and includes programs which are staffed and supported by the organization. On the slide, we've highlighted DLF, the Leading Change Institute, and the regranting programs that we oversee. We also serve as the fiscal or administrative host for a number of affiliates that you may know, including IIIF, NDSA, Open Repositories, and Code for Lib, among others. This constellation of initiatives that we have the privilege to work among contribute to our understanding of the cultural heritage sector in many ways and continually inform our programs. Recordings at Risk is just one of the many initiatives administered by CLEAR. And although we're talking about a funding opportunity today, it's important to note that we are not actually a funding agency. For the Recordings at Risk program, we receive generous funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and CLEAR acts as the regranting agency. So just as we receive proposals and reports from organizations, we also send proposals and reports to Mellon and to our other funding organizations. As a note, this is the last cycle of guaranteed funding that we have through our current grant. And while we're currently in conversations with the Mellon Foundation about the possibility of renewal, we don't have additional information to share just yet. So our work is accomplished by a relatively small staff of about 22 geographically distributed individuals. Most live in DC, but nobody on our team is there anymore. The grants team is myself, Sharon, and our colleague Joy Banks, who is unable to be here today. Together, we administer our 2 active regranting programs from application to final report. As we move into our program's content, we would like to center today's conversation by acknowledging that As residents of the US, we're speaking to you from the unceded lands of many Indigenous peoples, some of whom are represented here on this slide. In particularly, I would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air where I live in Riverside, California, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their homelands and ask you to join me in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, and future generations. May this acknowledgement and our ongoing work demonstrate CLEAR's commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. If you haven't done so already, we'd love to invite you to introduce yourself and to share a land acknowledgement for the area where you live or work, if you would like.
For more than 20 years, CLEAR has partnered with organizations to help raise awareness about the legal and practical threats to audio and audiovisual content. We supported the creation of the Library of Congress National Recording Preservation Plan in 2012 and gained valuable experience in re-granting through our flagship cataloging and digitizing hidden special collections and archives programs. In 2015, we collaborated on the ARSC Guide to Audio Preservation, which is a practical introduction to caring for and preserving audio collections and available as a free PDF download on our website. Through our work on these projects, CLEAR came to recognize that there are unique challenges facing those performing audio and audiovisual digitization descriptions. The first and biggest of these is that much AV content is at risk of being lost due to physical degradation and changing environmental conditions. As materials disappear, cultural history does too. A second major challenge is that specialized training is often necessary to address description, storage, and maintenance needs for these materials, which staff may not possess. Third, storage costs post-digitization can be prohibitive. Organizations may not have the existing digital infrastructure to store and maintain preservation copies, production copies, and access copies of the materials. And a final challenge that CLEAR recognized was the often tricky intellectual property situations surrounding AV content. All of the projects that have been funded through Recordings at Risk have had to work through some, if not all, of these challenges. Through the program, CLEAR aims to help organizations identify priorities for digital reformatting, build relationships with partners, raise awareness of best practices, and develop practical strategies for addressing all of them. To date, CLEAR has completed 8 award cycles for Recordings at Risk, funding a total of 127 projects involving 113 unique institutions and awarding over $3.9 million. In light of the many challenges unique to AV collections, the Recordings at Risk program was developed with 4 primary assessment criteria: impact, urgency, potential for preservation, and approach to access. These are different from our sibling regranting program, Digitizing Hidden Collections, as the emphasis for Recordings at Risk is grounded in the need for preservation through digitization and the recognition that materials will have varying levels of appropriate access given legal and ethical concerns. Recordings at Risk awards are smaller with shorter timelines and have a very narrow focus on the activities directly related to digitization work. And with that, Becca will move into the eligibility requirements for the program and the resources available to applicants.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. So we provide all the information that applicants should need on the Recordings at Risk program pages. in particular, the program's homepage and the Applicant Resources page. We will share these links throughout the presentation and also point to specific resources that are available there. So let's start with eligibility. To be considered for funding, you must be a US nonprofit, academic, research, or cultural memory organization. The organization and its collections must also be located within the United States or a related entity, such as Puerto Rico or American Samoa. Government units and their agencies are also eligible to apply, so long as their primary function is cultural heritage. And federally recognized tribal governments are also eligible. So if you have any specific questions about whether or not your organization is eligible for a grant, the best way to double check is to contact us via our program email address, recordingsAtRisk@clear.org. A couple other notes about eligibility. An eligible organization can only submit one application per cycle. If an organization does submit more than one, CLEAR will contact the responsible parties and ask them to pick just one for consideration this time. A common question that we receive concerns different campuses of a single academic entity. So for the purposes of this program, we treat each individual campus of a university system as its own distinct institution. For example, UC Berkeley and UC Riverside may submit separate applications and would not be required to join forces through a single University of California application. However, one of these universities would not be able to submit two applications from different schools or departments within the institution, such as one from the School of Law and one from the School of Engineering, or one from a campus library and one from a campus museum. Similar distinctions apply for national libraries and archives. Recordings at Risk does not have an official list of allowed or disallowed formats. We welcome applications as long as the format is audio and or visual, is time-based in nature, so no still photographs, slides, or documents. And you can find a qualified external service provider or vendor who can perform the digital reformatting in an appropriate way for the format and condition of the physical materials. It's important to note that the program was designed with analog to digital reformatting projects in mind. So while Born Digital AV content is no less important and is very much at risk, it's not the focus of this particular program right now. There are, of course, a few formats that blur the lines when it comes to analog digital distinctions, like digital audio or DAT. This particular format, for instance, is eligible and at risk. Files on a hard drive, however, in need of digital reformatting would not be eligible. So don't hesitate to reach out to us to double check the eligibility of a specific format that you have in mind. We can also talk through some of that in Q&A if you have questions. Our timeline for this cycle began on September 27th when the call for proposals opened. Proposals will be due on December 15th of this year, and recipients will be announced by April 4th, 2021. We always notify applicants individually before a public announcement is made. All projects must last between 3 and 12 months. For cycle 9, the earliest project start date will be May 1st, 2022. Because of the project length requirement, the latest that you could start a project is February 1st, 2023, and that would be one that was 3 months long. All projects must conclude by April 3rd, 2023. As we mentioned, we're in conversations with Mellon about future calls, but we don't have any information right now about a possible cycle 10. So the applicant resources page has a lot of information to assist you in your grant writing process or as you're thinking about applying. Of particular note are the template budget documents, FAQs, and a good number of sample proposals that may help inspire your application. We are regularly reviewing the resources that we provide, and we often update these in response to common questions or issues that we see.
Perhaps the most important resource on this page is the application guidelines and template. This is a single document providing step-by-step application instructions, explanation, and space for drafting responses. You can access it by clicking the View Guidelines at the top of the page. We've shared a screenshot of the first page of that document. The guidelines and template can be thought of as a handbook for the application, identifying how the questions will be asked in the online application system and providing additional instructions and the underlying, providing additional explanation, instructions, and the underlying rationale for the various components of the proposal. Some of what is covered in the guidelines will be mentioned here in the webinar and on the application form itself, but always reference the guidelines for a more comprehensive explanation of the application questions and requirements. This is available as a Google Doc that you can copy in order to develop your proposal alongside your team. You can also download the document as a Word document or PDF by selecting File and then Download As. Be sure that you are using the most recent version of this document, which is labeled Cycle 9 and dated September 27, 2021. This version will have all the appropriate dates and instructions. Bear in mind that the guidelines and template Google Doc is only a working document. You will still need to copy and paste your responses into CLEAR's online application system in order to submit a valid proposal. There are two other resources on the applicant resources page that we want to highlight. The first is the Digitizing Special Formats Wiki, a project co-hosted by our colleagues in the Digital Library Federation, or DLF, program. This resource may be of particular use to anyone new to digitization projects and includes links to planning resources, workflow documentation, and even a list of digitization service providers. The second is the technical recommendations for CLEAR's Recordings at Risk program. This is available under the Key Guides, Policies, and References section of our Applicant Resources document library. This is developed with the input of several of the members of our independent review panel. This document communicates more specific information about reviewer expectations for various aspects of recordings at risk projects. This will be especially useful to those who may be new to digital reformatting, working with vendors, or thinking about digital sustainability. We continue to add resources and refine this document as necessary. Next, we'll take a look at how to begin filling out the application. Once you've confirmed your eligibility as well as your project's alignment to the program, you may be ready to start your application. And you'll do this through our online grant management system, SurveyMonkey Apply, or as we say, SMAPLY, which you can reach by clicking the Apply Here button on the Applicant Resources page. The first step in the application process is registering for an account. Now, if you have applied to any previous Recordings at Risk cycles, beginning with the third call, or to Digitizing Hidden Collections call, or another CLEAR Fellowship program from 2018 forward, You will be able to log in with the Clear SML Apply profile you have already set up. You can use the forgot your password prompt if you need a reminder for that information. All others should use the register here link at the bottom of the dialog box. It's circled in red on your screen. For new users, you will receive a message from the SML Apply system that will verify your registration. If you don't receive the message right away, make sure to check your spam or junk folders. And if you still can't find the verification email, contact our team before attempting to register again. Try to avoid creating a new account when you've already set one up. This helps reduce the number of duplicate accounts in the system, which makes it easier for us to assist you. Something to consider as you are setting up your account: the same login information you use to submit your proposal will be how you will log in and access the reporting space should your project be awarded funding. So we recommend documenting the email and password you've used to reduce any confusion in the future. Once you've logged in or created and verified your account, you will see your application dashboard and should be able to start a Recordings at Risk application. Here you can jump to the different tasks of the application, view your progress, and add collaborators to help you prepare your application in the system. There's no need to attempt to complete the entire application in one sitting. You can also complete the task in any order you choose. Just be sure to save your work as you go. Most of the application content is contained in the application form task of SML Apply. The remaining tasks are all for uploads. When referencing the guidelines in template, you'll notice cross-referencing to actions that required an upload. This is our attempt to help applicants understand how all of the pieces of the application fit together thematically, even though the online system separates uploads to be added at the end. We've tried to make all of this as clear as possible in our supporting documents. But if you have any questions or suggestions about how we can make it even better, just email us at recordingsatrisk@clear.org. I'm going to turn it back over to Becca.
Yeah, so next we'll go over the different components of the application. There are 9 different sections listed here, and I'll pause for a moment before we dive in to remind you that if any questions have come up or if you think of any as we dive in, please submit them through the Q&A feature so that we can keep track of them. As Sharon noted, all of the required uploads are added at the end of the process, even though we'll be talking about them as parts of these sections. So the first section is the project summary. So this is where you will provide basic information about the project and your letter of institutional support. This letter should come from a head administrator within your organization who will be responsible for making decisions about allocating resources for preserving and maintaining access to the project deliverables over time. The purpose of this letter is to affirm your organization's dedication to the project and its long-term sustainability. If you're referring to the guidelines and template, you may notice that there's a little list icon next to many of the elements in the first section. This indicates that the information is going to be added to the Hidden Collections Registry. The registry is an open discovery tool that highlights rare and unique collections, including those nominated for Recordings at Risk and digitizing hidden collections. Registry entries are very short, giving basic descriptive information to scholars, professionals, and others looking for information about rare and unique materials. At the end of section 1 and throughout the application form, you'll see the choice to save and continue editing, which will save your work and keep you on the same page, or to click next, which will save your work and moving on to the next page. These buttons will navigate you through the entire form so that you don't miss any of the 9 sections. Section 2 is the description of content, where you provide a more thorough description of the source materials that you're proposing be reformatted. We're looking for information related to their provenance, arrangement, and current accessibility. The application also allows for the upload of an optional inventory. The inventory enables applicants to share with reviewers exactly which recordings will be digitized and to supply additional information about the condition, length, or right status of each recording if those are known. We do not have specific format requirements for the inventory, so applicants have the option of providing an edited and annotated copy of a pre-existing collection guide or finding aid. We just ask that your inventory make it very clear which media you're proposing to digitize through the funds that you're requesting. Finally, this section asks you to break down the materials by quantity and type. The image at the bottom shows the initial drop-down menu that asks how many different media types are included in your project. For example, if you would reformat 42 VHS videotapes and also 4 hours of wired recordings, you would need to choose 2 different media types, and the maximum is 10. This next slide shows the forms that are generated when 2 categories have been selected. So you would be able to enter the quantities and types of media that you propose to reformat, describing your VHS tapes under category 1 and your wire recordings under category 2. The fields under each category will include material type, amount, and unit of measurement. Units of measurement may either be items or recorded numbers. We ask that you list each category of material only once. So if you would like to include both the number of items and the number of recorded hours here, you can select 1 as the official unit of measurement and include the other in the additional information box below. You can also use that additional info box to specify any brand types, since some are more at risk than others, and other details that may be useful to reviewers, such as how you determine the estimated amount of the material. Section 3 concerns scholarly and public impact. Along with risk of loss, scholarly and public impact are the primary criteria upon which applications to this program are assessed. So CLEAR instructs reviewers to prioritize projects that include collections that are of high importance to a variety of disciplines and uses and will have broad national or international impact on the creation of new knowledge or experiences. This is your opportunity to make a compelling case for the potential impact of your nominated material. In addition to your own statement in this section, the application also requires that you provide at least 1 and up to 3 letters of support from experts who are familiar with the collection to help you make a strong case. The letters cannot come from individuals who are directly connected to the project, and it's strongly recommended that you get support letters from individuals outside of your home organization and, where possible, outside of the local region to help demonstrate wider interest. That being said, if there is a local scholar who really is the very best person to support your project, then it would make sense to ask them for a letter. Section 4 concerns risk assessment. Here is where the urgency of the proposed project is explained. A competitive application will demonstrate the organization's understanding of these risks, their strategic priorities for mitigating them, and how the proposed project advances those priorities. Note that if your materials are in good condition, you aren't necessarily going to be looked at unfavorably by reviewers. Sometimes good condition is a reason why recordings should be preserved now. The review panel considers many factors when evaluating risks, so we encourage you to think beyond physical condition of your materials. So things like age and evidence of decay are definitely important. Also take note of environmental factors that affect your geographic region, the age or health of the originator of the content, and potentially access to native speakers of endangered languages. The rarity of the items is also considered, so if you have the only copy of something, that certainly adds to its risk of loss. The Rights, Ethics, and Reuse section helps reviewers assess an applicant's understanding of the legal and ethical issues that may affect access to the nominated content and evaluate the proposed approach. So we require you to dedicate all metadata to the public domain under a Creative Commons waiver and to avoid imposing additional access restrictions on the reformatted recordings than what may already be in place for the source recordings. You can read more about this in our award terms on the Applicant Resources page. While this program does prioritize preservation over access, reviewers strongly prefer that applicants avoid creating unnecessary barriers to access, since such barriers inhibit a project's impact in some cases. Access restrictions are allowable when well justified due to legal or ethical concerns. Such restrictions will not necessarily disadvantage you in the competition and may even be viewed favorably by the review panel. This includes restricting access to recordings that include personally identifiable information or culturally sensitive material. The project design section describes how the project would work in practice and consists of the components that are listed on this slide. Design a project plan with a timeline that identifies all the major activities taken during each phase of your project, including the parties that are responsible and the deliverables you're proposing. Develop a technical approach that provides information related to preservation reformatting specs, metadata schema, and so on. Present a thoughtful digital preservation plan, which describes the processes and parties responsible for preserving the files that are created during your project, and how the preservation activities will be managed over time. Consider the creation of multiple copies of files, scheduled fixity checks, periodic migration of data to new storage material, and any metadata creation that enables these activities. Finally, provide a list of all envisioned project deliverables and how they'll be made available to users. You'll also list conditions and terms that limit their availability. All of these elements you can find more details about in the application guidelines. In this section especially, but throughout, please be mindful of all page limit requirements. Documents that exceed page limits will be truncated before they're passed along to reviewers.
Section 7 focuses on service provider information. Because the goal of the program is to help institutions without in-house capacity or expertise get started with preservation reformatting of their audio and audiovisual collections, all recordings at risk applicants must propose projects that name a qualified external service provider who will provide reformatting services. In-house digitization is not allowed, and proposals to reformat recordings at your own institution will disqualify your application. The most frequent question we receive about this is from academic institutions who would like to use on-campus digitization services that may be run through a different department. This would also be considered in-house digitization. In addition to covering the basic information on your selected service providers or providers, you will be asked to submit a rationale for service provider selection. Here, you will demonstrate that you've chosen a service provider or providers that perform technically competent and cost-effective digitization appropriate for the specific materials you are nominating. You may reference the service provider proposals, but make sure that you clearly explain your decision-making process. Generally, our review panelists expect to see more than simply saying, "We've worked with this vendor before." Our recipients also encourage all of you to look outside your usual vendors because you may find another service provider more suited to your particular project. We technically only require one service provider proposal, but in most cases, you are strongly encouraged to seek out additional bids and can include up to 3 total. Multiple bids help to demonstrate to reviewers that you have done your research and that the services to be provided are right for your specific materials and your organization's needs. Should your organization prohibit the selection of a service provider until after grant funds are awarded, you must still make a tentative selection for this proposal in order to support the figures that you will include in your project budget. The guidelines and template provide more detail, and CLEAR staff is available to answer your questions at recordingsatrisk@clear.org. While we are unable to recommend specific qualified service providers, we do have a few tips to help you in this process. Consider reaching out to colleagues for recommendations. Check to see which service providers partnered with organizations on similar grant projects. Explore resources provided by industry organizations like the Association of Moving Image Archivists, or AMIA, and the Association for Recorded Sound Collections that often publish lists of digitization service providers who meet the professional standards. Also, the DLF's Digitizing Special Formats Wiki has a list of companies and organizations who have volunteered their information to the page. You will still need to do your homework when it comes to assessing proposals from service providers. Another resource that may be helpful to you is the Effective Outsourcing with Audiovisual Digitization Service Providers webinar, also hosted by our colleagues at DLF and available on the wiki. We also encourage you to consult our guidelines for grants involving consultants or subcontractors for guidance on bidding, selection, and budgeting when working with an external service provider. Our technical recommendations for CLEAR's Recordings at Risk program also includes a section on soliciting and evaluating bids. Both documents are available on our Applicant Resources page. Section 8 is about funding, which relates directly to the service provider section, since the primary expense for most projects will be the cost of digital reformatting. There are 3 budget documents that need to be uploaded. The first is the budget narrative, which has no page limits and serves to explain to the review panel what you're spending and why. An optional budget narrative template is available on the Applicant Resources page, and you should use the application guidelines to help you build this narrative. You should explain all line items that appear in your budget, discuss how your organization will manage your project, and why you are seeking external funding for this project. The budget detail must be submitted on the budget and financial report form, which is a macros-enabled Excel template provided by CLEAR. You can hover over any red numbers on the sheet to access additional instructions, as well as review the Instructions tab for more detail. The third budget document is the Service Provider Proposal. This is simply a PDF upload of the proposal or proposals that you have selected. Quotes from additional service providers that you did not ultimately select can be added as appendices. All allowable costs within the request, which includes any cost from your service provider, should be directly related to preservation reformatting of nominated materials and may include costs charged by a service provider related to stabilizing media for the purposes of preservation reformatting, conducting preservation reformatting, or basic metadata creation, shipping of materials to the service provider, and insurance for materials during shipping and handling by the service provider. In addition to the expenses directly related to the preservation through digital reformatting of at-risk materials, this program allows for some additional yet still connected activities. All such additional costs must be specifically and strongly justified throughout the proposal, and especially in the budget narrative. We have made these adjustments in response to frequent requests to consider allowing requests for these kinds of services and materials. Note in particular that automated captioning, some basic transcription work, and the purchase of digital storage media or rehousing supplies are allowable. At the same time, it is vital to keep in mind that the purpose of the Recordings at Risk program is to support preservation reformatting and not enhance access. So these kinds of costs should remain a minor percentage of a project budget if a proposal is to remain competitive. Reviewers will, at their discretion, decide which applicants might need more additional support of these kinds than others, due to the apparent limitations of an applicant organization's capacity to fund this work through other means. CLEAR and its review panel expect to see fair compensation for any labor funded through this program. Conversely, there are a handful of disallowed costs, and I'll just point out a few that are particularly relevant. Indirect costs are disallowed by all CLEAR's grants programs, as are any miscellaneous costs. Electronic equipment other than dedicated digital storage media. Software licenses and services are unfortunately something that we can't cover, including digital storage services. Extensive conservation work beyond what is required to get a solid capture of the materials is not covered. And extensive processing and editing of digital audio files post-transfer is also disallowed. The most complete list of allowable and disallowed costs will be found in Appendix A of the guidelines in the template document. So be sure you carefully review those as you develop your proposal. You can also reach out to us via email with any questions you have regarding these items.
We'll try to get through these last couple of slides quickly so that we can turn to Q&A. The applicant information section is the most straightforward. You'll be asked to provide proof of nonprofit status, a board or trustee list, contact information for the PI, and your institution's address. You'll be given the option of submitting proof of nonprofit status one of two ways: by entering your IRS EIN number or by supplying your IRS determination letter or other approved document. Not all EINs will be recognized by the system, so if it doesn't work, please plan to upload the appropriate corresponding documents. And as always, let us know if you have any questions or if issues arise. The final component is an optional additional information section where you can upload appendices. Keep in mind that you should use this judiciously and only include additional information that clearly and directly supports your main proposal. Reviewers will prioritize the main application form and required components, and will probably be unlikely to do more than a skim of additional documents that are especially lengthy or tangential to the project. But it can be helpful to highlight particular points or details as you want reviewers to notice. rather than to expect them to wade through a 100-page finding aid of photographs or very similar looking items. You want these supporting documents to build reviewers' excitement about your project rather than to frustrate or confuse them. The allowable uploads are listed in the guidelines and include a summary of collections assessments that have taken place in the past, accession documents if you have them, donor agreements, which are handy to reference when you're discussing rights issues, photographs of the nominated materials to show their physical condition. These are especially helpful to provide evidence of the at-riskness of your content. Audio or visual samples that are relevant to the nominated materials. These can help to make the case for scholarly impact. Sample metadata records or even mock-ups of how records will appear to users online. These can be helpful to illustrate the technical plan that you have and how access will be provided to the deliverables. And as we mentioned earlier, extra service provider proposals can be added here as well. The main one that you have selected will be uploaded earlier in the application. So we are nearing the end, and I've seen a good number of questions come in, but please keep them coming. So just a few final tips. We know that the pandemic and related closures may still be affecting you. Project planning in the best of times can be challenging, so we want to take a moment to make a few specific notes to all of you who are working on applications right now. One of the most common reflections that we hear from recipients is that additional time should be factored into your project timeline. The program limits projects to no more than 12 months, so think about what that may mean when you consider potential delays and any plans for accessibility to materials. Would a smaller project right now be more feasible? Could you achieve the same goals through a more flexible metadata strategy? Do you have plans in place if you're unable to access your collections for a period of time? Service providers have often been affected by these same closures and delays. We've heard that it's getting better, but please think about how that may translate to your project. Have you asked about any protocols that they may have in place to facilitate remote processing? Do they have considerations for shipping delays? Lessons that they've learned and could pass along to you moving forward about operating during a pandemic? We also want to note that should your project be funded, the program does have a lot of allowances and flexibilities for no-cost extensions and other modifications. Our hope for all funded projects is to see them safely and successfully to completion, and the grants team is here to support you every step of that way post-funding. You're not asked to address COVID directly in your application, but reviewers are interested in understanding if it is affecting or if it is a factor in your project's design. So if that is the case, you can address it in your project plan especially. If we can answer any questions or offer any additional clarification about that, please let us know. A few broader tips. First, ask yourself, is this program the right fit for my project? It's worth the time spent researching to make sure you're investing time in a grant program whose criteria and goals align with yours. Second, please read the instructions carefully. Third, leave yourself as much time as possible and plan everything out in advance. Treat this like a project and meet often to track progress, which will help make for a smooth drafting process. Fourth, assemble a team of people with different expertise to draft different parts of the proposal. And our panelists really care that proposals ask for the amount that's needed to get the project done successfully. We often get questions about whether cost effectiveness is the most important consideration, and that's not the case. Don't just choose the lowest cost vendor because it's the lowest cost. Please select the vendor that is most qualified to do the work to the standards that you've established, and then justify your choice. If you need to include staffing for work directly connected to the project, explain to the reviewers why that funding is needed and how the work is outside the normal scope of your current institutional capacity. Next, reach out to staff. At CLEAR, we're available to answer your specific questions over email at any time. And finally, propose a project that you really believe in. Your commitment and excitement to a project definitely come through in your application, and reviewers take note. And I'd love to hear any more tips that any of you have to share if you've done a project like this before. I think all input is very valuable. So now we're going to spend about 10 minutes with questions. And if we run out of time to answer all of them, we will provide written answers in the Q&A doc that we post alongside the recording. All of the links that we've provided in the chat will also be in that same document, so please check back. And please note that we will be holding a full hour-long session dedicated to your questions on October 26th, so around 3 weeks from now. The link has just been added to the Applicant Resources page this morning, and we will drop it in the chat too. So with that, Lizzie, please fire away.
Okay, so the first question is, are CDs and DVDs eligible?
Take that.
Yeah.
I got them. Yes, okay. Yes, they are eligible. However, reviewers will probably want to know what makes these recordings at risk and why it would be necessary to transfer them from the format they are in into another digital standard. And Beck, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen a project funded that was composed entirely of CDs and DVDs. Generally, if they are part of a funded project, they're a smaller portion. So that's something to keep in mind, is the competitiveness of proposing an application with CDs and DVDs only.
Thank you. Does the grant cover insurance costs for shipping the recordings to the chosen vendor? What happens if a physical item is lost?
Yeah, so the one of the funding slides that we put up noted that insurance costs are covered. You'll want to, if you can get them through your vendor proposal or included in your vendor proposal, that is really great. And if a physical item is lost, that is a really good question that I don't particularly know the answer to.
Yeah, I think we've had that happen, but
on our end, I would say that if an item is lost, that insurance should hopefully provide support. And if it was a significant part of your project, if you had additional materials that you wanted to sub in, you could definitely do that to include on your project. But yeah, if that happens, definitely contact us and we can talk more.
Okay, great. I think you already answered this question, but the chat and Q&A content will be on the applicants page. Okay.
Yeah, please check back by the end of the week.
Okay. The next question is, we applied for a community-based archives opportunity with Andrew Mellon back in June. However, we were denied. In order to apply for this grant, we understand we must not have applied within the current application cycle. Are they eligible to apply for a Recordings at Risk grant, given that they also applied for a grant at Mellon during this summer? Tara, if I garbled your question, please correct me.
That makes sense, yeah. Yeah, I can take that one. The two aren't considered connected for the purposes of applying. We receive our funding from the Mellon Foundation, but in this case, CLEAR would be the funding entity. So you are absolutely welcome to apply.
Okay. Next question, would still film strips that were designed to be shown accompanying audio recordings qualify, assuming both the film strip and the paired recording were available for digitization?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to say, unfortunately, not. I think that would be a part of the larger project to preserve that you would need to do separately. We are really strictly thinking about the audio, visual, and time-based materials here.
Can non-academic 501c3s apply for this grant?
Yes, yes, they can. As long as you can, you're in a U.S. organization or a U.S. territory, and you can also provide proof that you're a nonprofit, and that part of your mission includes the preservation of materials.
Can our proposal include multiple separate collections, or should we focus on one collection within our repository?
There's no requirement as to the number of collections that can be included in a project. So you could propose something that pulled together or materials from, a wide variety of collections, as long as there was a cohesive reason for doing it, as long as the impact was all in alignment, that would be absolutely fine.
I'm not sure if this was answered by your previous answer, but would silent 16mm film from 1946 be eligible?
Yes, I would say that film is absolutely eligible. So yes.
Do we have a preferred file format, .avi versus MP4, for example?
CLEAR does not, and our reviewers do not have a preference as to file formats or anything really related to the design of the project itself. I think as long as the vendor proposal and your own explanation of the needs are well justified, the review panel will be considerate of whatever plan you propose. And our technical specifications that we mentioned earlier, that resources document may have some guidance about industry standards, but we do not specify.
Okay. If you have received a Recordings at Risk award previously, are you eligible to submit in a new round?
Oh, I was going to see if Sharon was going to answer that one, but
I'm
you
sorry,
are
I was
eligible.
typing in the chat box. I see
No
somebody
worries.
has their hand raised.
Yeah. If you have received a Recordings at Risk award in the past, you can apply again. I would say that you will probably want to address the fact that you received that award, either when you're talking about your capacities to do this one, why you need funding, relying on that award for some of that explanation will be helpful to reviewers. We have seen organizations get multiple awards through this program.
If you are resubmitting a project from a prior submission, but some areas have been readdressed, do we tick the resubmission box, or is that considered a new submission?
Yeah, you would click the resubmission box when you apply, and hopefully during that time you address the concerns from the previous review panels. We often have applicants that have resubmitted in the past, and when those applicants have gone back and addressed the issues that prior reviewers have put it's really looked upon very favorably amongst the reviewers. So yes, you would.
Yeah,
Are
we
there-
try to reassign applications to folks who have read it before if we can. And we'll do maybe one more. I'm sorry.
And Peter had his hand up. I don't know if he has a question that he didn't put in the chat box or something. I don't know.
Yeah, Peter, I'll assume you'll put something in either chat or Q&A if you have a question. So the next question is, are there eligibility restrictions with regard to where the recordings were made, such as outside the US?
No, the recordings can be made outside of the US, but they have to exist at an organization within the US or US territory. I hope I answered that question for you.
Do you want any more, or are we going to wrap up?
I think we'll have to wrap it up there. Please check back. We will answer all of your questions in writing by the end of this week. So please remember that we have that upcoming session on October 26th if you come up with more questions as you get started. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today to learn about this program. We are happy to answer additional questions via email at recordings@risk@clear.com. We all monitor the program's inbox and do our best to reply as promptly as possible. You can also keep up with us on Twitter at Clear Grants. Don't forget, applications are due December 15th. And thank you all so much for your interest in the program and for attending our session today. We hope you have a great afternoon and happy grant writing.